charge by the hour. And I've been working on Access for over 25 years. I just got a question, which I get repeated. If one of my clients is still on 97 and was told by someone who doesn't know Access that they should get off it, which I...
Yeah, because Access is going to be deprivated by the end of the century.
Well, it's like, yeah, it's
Century, we're not quite sure, but...
don't really have a lot of maintenance on the database. They virtually none, and it's working. Why bother? I mean, I love playing with all my other clients. I've upgraded, but what can I say?
Okay, so I've got the recording started now. Let's go on. David, do you want to introduce yourself real quickly and what you do?
Hi, this is David Neely in Denver, and I'm a proposal manager. And I just play around with Access because it's a lot of fun. Next.
Well, thank you. And I guess Kevin?
Sure. I'm Kevin. I'm in Redmond. I've been using Access since 1.0, SQL Server since a version like 4.21, which was the beta version of Access 2.0. Had a midlife crisis, took a job with the Access team, worked on all or parts of 3 releases, and now I'm kind of just doing whatever, trying to keep myself busy.
Yeah, good. And so that gets us back to Kent, who's our presenter for the evening.
I first got into this caper. I was working I had a retail venture, and this is back in about 1990, and I decided that you couldn't really run a retail store without point of sale software at this stage. You know, that wasn't all as common as it is now. Well, I got this piece of software, and, you know, it was nicely designed, but the organization behind it was just a bit chaotic. And after I sold my retail business, they actually pulled me in as a business analyst to get them sorted out. And so I came across this application, and I went in there, and every morning we'd sit down and we'd address all the issues, which meant we talked about them, but didn't actually do anything about them. And I set to actually sorting the business out. And one of the major issues was that we had this us and them relationship between the customers. They effectively, we had a term, they'd flipped the bozo switch. And so I had to try and sort a lot of that out. Oh, we have another person. Hi, Tom.
Yep.
Anyhow, so I come to this as a business analyst primarily. And one of the tasks I decided needed to be done was that we actually had to have some software to manage our support department, and the developers were all too busy writing the software. So I picked up Microsoft Access and started writing an application to manage our support calls. And that's how I kind of got into it. And I was hacking away in Access, and then I started to, well, I left for a little while and came back again, and I was managing the development team. So I started writing the Access application to manage the development with a focus on identifying what support parts of the software were causing the most support issues and focusing in on that and sorting it out. Now,
can I interrupt you for a second? We have some more people join, so can we kind of put your presentation on hold for a minute and get Adrian and Jack and Tom to introduce themselves as well? I realize I'm breaking the flow. I see Adrian trying to talk, but I don't hear his. Yeah. Tom, can you introduce yourself real quickly and tell us what your connection to Access is?
Sure. Gosh, my connection to Access, I got started in the mid-90s, and I was an officer of the Pacific Northwest Access Users Group and Developers Group, which kind of merged later. I had the honor of becoming a most valuable professional in 2006, and I held that award until 2012, so 6 years. Worked at Boeing for all those years, and in 2008, transferred out of the chem lab into flight test. And that's where I got to use more of the Access on a day-to-day basis. That came to an end last year when, due to COVID and 737 MAX, so Boeing and I separated ways. So anyways, that's my connection.
Great. So, Adrian, are you able to? I see your mouth moving, but I hear nothing. Well, Adrian is in England. He is a Access developer as well. And I won't try to put words in his mouth. I'll just tell you that much about him and then move on. Brett, I see, has joined us. Brett is from Australia. Brett, can you introduce yourself real quickly and tell us what your connection to Access is?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
How you going there? Yeah, I've been doing Access since uni 1995. Started in Access too. Had my own business in Perth, Western Australia. Been doing Access ever since. I had a brief sort of movement into .NET a few years ago, but then went back to Access when I found Access was more productive or had a whole different market. So I come across to the Portland. Well, I have been across to the Portland conference for about 10 or 11 times. So I know a lot of the guys over there. I also go to that Vienna conference, been there about 3 times, which is great. It's Europeans are really into Access big time, the Germans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad to have you with us. I think the only person left is Jack. Can you introduce us?
Yeah, hi there, Jack, and I'm located just outside Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm one of the old timers in Access too. I remember buying it. I think it was called Cirrus is the test name. I've worked with Access off the side of my desk, kind of side projects for ever since then, and I've only got one big application that I've developed with a trucking contractor over the last 20 years, and I still support that kind of somewhere between a hobby and a home business. And I recently become transferring it into SQL Server with an Access front end. So I just became aware of this group about 2 months ago, and this is my first opportunity to join one of your conferences. So pleased to meet you people.
Well, we're glad to have you join us. Yeah. One more quick housekeeping thing. The recording is started. We're going to have this available. I'm not sure how that's going to work this month. We've got a little bit different thing going on, so hopefully I'll get it up on YouTube in a timely fashion. But in the meantime, we're going to turn the time back to Kent. I'll just say this. This month I was really grateful. I know Kent has been a valuable contributor to previous meetings, and I thought it would be very helpful to have him showcase what he does in a full meeting. He chose to talk to us about the software development lifecycle, which from my soapbox is pretty important. I think I had a conversation with Armin Stein. You probably all know Armin. Some time ago, and he was looking for developers, and we talked a little bit about it, and he said, in his shop, he really didn't want any cowboy coders. And by that, he meant people who do whatever they feel like doing and are not as disciplined enough, not disciplined enough to work in his shop, basically. And so I think I took that to heart, and I think what Kent's going to talk to us about tonight is it's kind of an important aspect of a good professional software developer. So with that introduction, I'll give the time back to Kent, and we'll see how we should all be performing.
Well, as we know, Access is a little more structured than, say, a spreadsheet, but Access will still let you do lots of things that you shouldn't. Anyhow, so when I got into this game, I was managing a development team, and we had the software was point of sale, and it was being used at about 3,000 sites. It was totally impossible for us to go and modify the data structures on site. So the management of the data structures is all built into the front end. And that was one thing they had that was really quite good. Apart from the fact that the development team and the testing and all that was a bit of a mess when I first took over. But to give you some idea, after a year of managing the development team, we got from having 15 support people who were working their asses off to 2 people who were sitting around doing nothing. And we managed that by targeting like collecting data on the support calls and focusing on the bits of the software that were causing the most problem and honing in on that and fixing it. And over a year, we pretty much eliminated all the issues. Anyhow, so what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm coming from a business analyst perspective first, and then we'll talk about how I apply the technical aspects, like writing the software, to actually deliver on the processes that I've figured out as a business analyst. And a lot of this applies to software that's being released to thousands of users, but these days I mostly work on custom applications that don't have a whole lot of users, but we still need to manage the development lifecycle. The same principles are going to apply to whatever language you're using, whether it's Access as a front end with SQL as a back end, or Access with a front end and Access as a back end, or .NET or PHP or anything like that. Now, the first thing we need to understand about a software development lifecycle is that we have essentially 3 environments that we're working with: the development environment, the test environment, and the production environment. And the people who are involved will look at as well and define a bit more about those. Now, in the application that we'll be looking at the behind the scenes framework for the actual application that manages the development lifecycle process. And a lot of this is to do with the database structure, and we actually build the database structure in the front-end application, and the front-end application applies those changes to the back end, whether it be in production or test or development. So no one should ever actually be touching the back-end databases. Now, the same thing applies for tables, columns, indexes, triggers, views, stored procedures, all of that. Okay, so as I mentioned, part of the objective is to remove this us and them culture between the developers and the testers and the end users. And part of this is that we need to share the responsibility between the developer and the client themselves. And here I'm talking about a custom application rather than a widely distributed one. With a widely distributed application, you should have the resources and you should be doing thorough testing before it gets out of the developer shop. But in the case of a custom application, I generally ensure that my client is responsible for actually testing and then releasing the software into production. So if they don't bother doing enough testing before they release it, they can't come back and blame me. It's my fault as the developer. And sure, I do a lot of testing, and because of my background, I'm probably a much better tester than a lot of software developers, but the whole point is that we share that responsibility of doing releases with the client themselves. So we've got me as the developer. The project manager is the person who writes the specification and does the testing before they decide it's ready for release. And then, of course, we all know what users are. So let's have a bit of a closer look at the development, test, and production environments. So developers should never be working directly on production data. Now, those of you who entertained Access web apps, getting back on almost 10 years ago now, found that we were being expected to actually develop software applications that we were writing in the production environment. So you get into SharePoint and you start hacking away at the application which is connected to the Azure backend, the production backend, and we're expected to develop like that. And as we saw, there are a number of major issues that got thrown up when Microsoft would release a new version, and because it was all going applied direct to production, when they made changes to the emailing issue, or there was another couple there, but once every few months, they'd essentially break it. And we had no way of actually developing and testing before we were released into production. So that just doesn't kind of cut it as far as I'm concerned. So developers should never be working in a production environment. They should be never hacking away at production data, and neither should the testers. So with the developers, when we want to make changes to the schema, we do it like here. If we come in and we have a look at, in this situation, we've got a customer table, and down the left, we've got a list of all the tables that are in this application. And when we want to make changes or add a table or make changes to the columns in that table, we do that here. And we can go and have a look in here, and we can apply the different attributes of the columns. And then when it comes time to release that into test, those changes are applied automatically to the test database. As soon as the application is put in, the splash screen pops up. We see there's a change in version, and the schema update goes and makes all the changes to the database structures. So no one's ever actually touching the back ends in any of those environments. And this means that we've got a totally reliable system of applying schema changes, rather than, I had a situation about 20 years ago. I was working for an organization, and they were sending consultants out to run scripts on everyone's servers every time there was a new release of the software, which was just insane. And, I had a couple of drop dead down arguments about this, but as a business analyst, I kind of figured out that it was all about being able to charge for consultants to go out on site was more important than making the whole thing reliable. Anyhow, we move on. Now, the documentation in the software development lifecycle starts with a requirements document, a specification. That'll then develop into a logical design. The developers hack away at the software according to the logical design, and then release a version for testing that has release notes in it so that testers know what to test for and what should have changed. And then as we move through the test environment, we produce user documentation. So the original specification gets fleshed out into a logical design, which can include some technical stuff as well. And it comes back to testing with release notes, that logical design, and it eventually turns into user documentation as it moves into the production environment. Now, the importance of that specification can't be overemphasized. This is your contract with the client on the required outcomes. When you have a client who doesn't know what they want, but they'll know what they don't want when they get it, that specification document is very valuable, because you can say, well, this is the specification, this is what we worked to, you've agreed this was what you were going to get, this is what you got. If you've changed your mind or you didn't really know what you wanted in the first place, that's not my fault. But on the other side of the argument, as business analysts, part of our job is to help guide the client to produce that specification document and the logical designs, and ensure that the outcomes that are actually needed, rather than just what they ask for, because what they ask for and what they actually need are usually two entirely different things. So it's up to us to actually elicit the required outcomes, and then I usually go right into the absolute complexities of what needs to be covered, and then distill it back down to something simple that we put into the logical design and we all sign off on. Now, the logical design can be as simple as items up on a Kanban board like Trello, if they're not particularly complex. But if you've got major changes in the functionality, then a more complete logical design is really worth putting in the effort. Because once you've got a good logical design, the software more or less just writes itself. And I find that, yeah, with a logical design, it takes a lot of the effort out of coding, because you pretty much already have an outline of what you've got to do. However, during that development period, you're going to come across little things that you haven't thought of during the logical design, and you may have to go back and renegotiate with the client to modify the requirements and the logical design to come up with something that is more efficient and more effective than what you may have originally envisaged. Now, once that release comes out of development, and when it comes out of development, I usually have something like this, which is the version number you can see there, the tasks that were performed in that particular version, and over on the right there, you can see which objects were actually affected during those changes. So we've got a complete version history, and in some cases, very detailed release notes to go out with the release itself. So by building those release notes into the application, they are thereby transported to the test environment along with the application and along with any schema changes. Everyone with me so far? Any questions? No? Okay, we'll move along.
Actually, I did. I just was on mute. Can I? Okay. So this is built into every application that you work on. Is the release notes are part of the structure that gets moved into production?
Yes, well, except for one, but yes, I'm moving towards that with that one too.
Okay.
So the application not only holds a list of all the tables and fields and the database structure, but it also actually keeps a track of any objects that were changed and the release notes.
Okay.
So once we get into the test environment, with those release notes and the logical design, we can see if the outcome was what we were expecting. Does the software do what the logical design says it's going to do? Now, again, there can be some negotiation in this period where the logical design and the specification is negotiated to be a little bit different, but when it's coming out of testing, the two need to be totally aligned. The logical design and what the software does, I've got to say the same, they need to have the same story at that point. So up until that point, there is a bit of push and shove and argy-bargy and a bit of evolution. But at the end of that, we've got a logical design and a software process that all agree. Now, one of the best ways to test use cases is to actually create a training video. You can't get through a training video of a use case if the software's got glitches in it. So that's really quite good. But videos are great for use cases like this is how you do this entire process. But I don't see it as a substitution for written documentation that allows people to actually go and look something up. I mean, I get really quite frustrated with programs that are just hours and hours of people, of talking heads. And if you want to actually find something, you can't. It's not like a book where you can look at the table of contents, or a good user manual, which has a table of contents at the front and hopefully an index at the back, where you can go in and find what you actually want to know and just read that paragraph or two. Yeah, so big long videos I find really rather annoying. Okay, so as we saw with the release notes, we've got the areas of software that are affected, the lists of objects that are affected, the change in functionality, and you'll also notice there that I actually put in the amount of time I spend on that particular feature. So it's incorporating my billing. When the clients get the new version, they can see how long I spent doing each bit. And I found that's pretty good as well. So after you've done a bit of work, you have to enter your release notes and the time it took you to do them. Now, you'll also notice there that we've got a list of all the objects affected. Now, built into this application, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we can see the object dependencies. So, for example, we can see everywhere where the customer table is being used. It's being mentioned in all those queries and those forms. If we would go to a form, and again, let's have a look at customer. We can see everywhere where that customer form was referred to. And you'll notice for a start, it's never referred to in a query, because that would be query parameters suck. And that same thing holds for reports. Even with queries, we can see everywhere where that query is used. Okay, so here in a table, if I double click on that there, it takes me to the query and shows me where that query is actually used. I didn't click on a query, I clicked on a Oh, right. Even in this case, a stored procedure that's using that table. But that's another story for another day. But that allows me to, in particular, I can see here whenever that form has been opened. If I can have a look and see a form's not being used anywhere and it hasn't been opened in 2 years, I know I can safely scrap it. And that's, when you're working on a big application, that's rather useful. All right. So even when I'm making changes to a, for example, a view, when I'm working in the in Management Studio, I'll modify my object here. And then I can just paste it back into the front-end application. Now, for a view, for example, we need a primary key for it to be editable. So when I run this particular script from the front end, it not only modifies that view in the back end, but it also recreates the primary key in the front end, which is quite useful. Right, the other thing with testing is that we need to have test cases for critical use cases. So before any release is done, you've got those everyday processes that if they have a problem with them, everybody stops working. So you need to have a critical use case test script that you run through before that test version's released into production. And that's quite important too. Well, a quick note on relinking tables is that it's quite important when you've got a development, test and production environment and they're all in the same local area network, you've got to be sure that when that front end moves to a different environment, the relinks are 100% reliable, because you don't want a new version getting into production with one table still linked to the test database. And you've got people plugging away at data thinking it's going into the production database, but it isn't. That's not good. All right. So let's start having a look at the schema management in detail and the technical aspects of this. Now, we start off, as we saw, with that version form, which has a major version, a data version, and a minor version. If we get a change in the major version or the data version, that means there's been a change to the back-end schema and we have to run the schema update. A minor change means that the user is forced to get a new front end, and when that new minor version is first put in to the production environment, it will update any of those server objects. The first thing we connect to, so first thing that happens is that the splash screen pops up, checks the version against the back-end version. If it's the first time this front end's been stuck into production, then if there's an increment in the data version between, or a difference between the front end and the back end, runs the schema update, and that new version is available for everyone else. And when they fire up their splash screen and it sees a change in version, it shells out to a little Access app that copies the new version from the distribution version on the server and fires the application back up again. Right, so the hardest part about writing schema update software is getting everything in the right order. If you don't get things in the right order, you're going to be throwing errors. Like if you start to try and modify a field that is used in a foreign key relationship, or it has an index, you'll throw an error. So what we do is we get everything in the right place. And the first thing I usually do, at least with a SQL database, is the first thing we do is drop all the foreign keys. Then for each table, we'll then go in and we'll dump all of the indexes. Then we'll make any changes. Then we'll apply indexes to that table, move on to the next table. And eventually at the end, when all the tables are done, we apply the foreign keys again. Now, doing it that way means that you are not bound by those foreign key relationships where you would need to do the parent table first, then the child table, then the child of that and the child of that. By dropping all the foreign keys, it means you can update tables in any order and you're not affected by those relationships. Now, the same process works for Access as a backend or SQL Server as a backend. The only difference being that if it's an Access backend, you're primarily using DAO and DDL to make your changes, whereas if it's a SQL Server backend, you're using T-SQL via an ADA connection. Now, the process itself deals with a lot of those little idiosyncrasies, the syntaxes, and all that kind of stuff that you got to try and remember if you're writing a SQL script. Things like what's the syntax for dropping a table def, for example? Well, with Access, you know, it's current db.tabledefs.drop space table name. But you have to remember that, because in some cases you go back there and go, oh, table defs table name dot delete. No, that won't fly. So when you're doing things this way, all you've got to do is say, okay, I want to drop this table. Hit that drop checkbox, and the syntax is all handled for you. Okay, during this process, we've got to have some kind of error handling. Now, you're going to be throwing a lot of errors that you don't care about. For example, if you try and drop an object that you've already dropped, it's not a problem. If, however, there's another reason that that object didn't drop, because there's a constraint or something being left on it, then you actually do care about the error. Now, when you're doing this in Access, you'll find that ADO errors all give you the same error number. And with that same error number, you do, in fact, get a different error description, but the error number is always the same. So I actually have a little class here which parses out the error description to give me an error number that tells me that sort of stuff, but it also tells me if it's an error that requires action or not. So, for example, there is already an object of this name. Do we need to action that? No. We're trying to add an object that already exists, not a problem. Same as if we're trying to drop a table, an object that doesn't exist, we don't care. And we'll get back to have a look at that in a minute. All right, so we've got to handle ADO errors, but with DAO, again, we can just have error handling that says, yeah, okay, this error number is because I've just tried to set a field variable to be this field and it doesn't exist. Therefore, I need to create it instead. Okay, let's go to the process in detail, and we can flick between here. This is an overview, and then we'll get to have a look at the code in a little bit more detail. I don't know how I'm doing for time here. Oh. All right, well, obviously, the first thing you've got to do is do a backup. Connect to the backend version table, and see if you need to actually do this stuff. Right, you've got to make sure you've got exclusive access, probably more important with SQL than Access. No, sorry, more important than with Access than with SQL. You've got to update the stored procedures and pass-throughs that are going to be used in the process to run your ADO code. You've got to run any fixes on the data. You've got to drop your relationships. Then for each table, we're going to drop the indexes. We're going to either create, drop, or refresh the link to each table. Then for each column, again, add, drop, or even rename, alter column, add constraints like not null, etc. Then add the indexes. If we want a log table, which is essentially the same, an exact copy of that table, except that we're going to be putting any changes in it. So we're going to take the primary key off it, so we can add multiple records from the parent table. We create our relationships, we update the server objects, and we move on through that. Now, I'll give you all, you can all have a copy of this Word document later so you can put in your own notes if you want. Right, so let's look at it in detail. Now, naming conventions are pretty important. You can use your own naming conventions, just so long as they're consistent. And if you want to do a find and replace on an object, it's easy enough to do because they have unique names. Now, I'm sure you're all pretty much know that you shouldn't be putting spaces or arithmetic operands or ampersands and what have you in column names. Otherwise, you've got to put square brackets around anything, which is really quite annoying. Armenstein made a point of not using plurals in names. With English, putting an S on the end doesn't necessarily make something plural. So if you were to produce a form which you then wanted to clone and use as another form, simply replacing the entity name with a find and replace, if you've used plurals, is not quite as easy. Now, with all these framework objects, I give them an OSIS prefix rather than using USIS. That way, I can still hide my system objects, and the only object I can't see that I really do want to see is USIS ribbons, but that's beside the point. I create a query for that. But all of those, otherwise those OSIS objects are hidden generally. Now, I use the LNC naming conventions, dear old Stan Lewinsky, wasn't he ahead of his time? But I also use field names that are made up of what it is I'm describing, what the data type is. And you'll see that when we have a look at some of those field names. And by doing that, I can just look at the suffix on a field name and I immediately know what type of data it is. So if I'm trying to handle a null, I can go, okay, it's a date. I know what to do with that. It's a numeric data type. You know, it's an NZ0. If it's string, I know how to handle that. Okay. Getting down a bit more of the pointy end. Now, in SQL Server, we have a couple of stored procedures which are really quite useful. Now, if we have a look at a customer table, these are all the constraints that are on that table. Now, this all comes from a stored procedure through a pass-through query. So I can see all of the primary keys, foreign keys, default values, all of the constraints that have been applied to that table. Likewise, I can see all the indexes. And that's done using a stored procedure. Here is another view of that where I can see all the child tables of this particular table, as opposed to generally the constraints are showing you the parent tables. Because the constraint actually belongs to, like indexes, actually, well, like a foreign key belongs to the child table, not the parent table. So when you're actually looking at a foreign key in a parent table that's looking at the child, that relationship actually belongs to the child table. So we've got a couple of really useful little stored procedures that do that, and I stole them from somebody else, but I've made them my own. And I use a generic pass-through query that'll run the T-SQL statements against ADO. Little comment there, you can use an unnamed pass-through query def, but I like to use a named one because then if you have a problem, you can actually just go and open it and run it, and you get a bit more detail about the error than if you use an unnamed one. And I also put a timeout of it of just like 7, right? So you're not sitting there and for a minute or two waiting for it to finally throw its error. If it's going to error, it's going to error quickly. All right, so as I said, we drop the relationships as the first thing we do. Now, for Access, we're going to iterate the entire, because the relations collection is a collection of the database itself. So when you're dropping all the relationships, you iterate through all the relationships, but you just want to leave the system ones alone. So anything that starts with MSIS, leave it alone. Don't touch it. With SQL Server, you've actually got a list of all the foreign keys in that constraint list, and you can use those to delete all your relationships and then create them again afterwards. In SQL Server, defaults are actually a constraint, as opposed to in Access, they're a property of the field or an attribute of the field. And what I've used for constraint names, default values, as you can see there, we've got DF, no prizes for guessing what that is. On the customer, the field name is customer active. Then I have 2 underscores followed by the default value itself. So if I've changed the default value, I can look in that table and go, okay, the new name is different to the old name because I've changed that bit on the end. I need to dump the old one and recreate it. All right, so now we get into the tables where we're going to be dropping all of the indexes for that particular table. In Access, you want to leave the primary keys and the foreign keys there. Access and SQL deal with foreign keys, the indexes in a somewhat different manner. How am I doing for time? Oh, okay. So there's a couple of things you just need to be aware of that are a bit different between Access and SQL Server as far as indexes and primary keys. If you create a primary key in either of them, it creates an index. The backend creates an index as well. If you set a field in a table in SQL Server to be the primary key, you get a primary key constraint and an index with the same name. Otherwise, the naming conventions in SQL Server are that indexes need to be unique throughout the entire database. In Access, the index names need to be unique for that table. So in Access, every table can have a primary key index called primary key. You can't do that in SQL Server. They've got to have individual unique names. So if we need to drop the table, we can. The process will do that. If we need to add the table, we can do that, or we can create it. Now, important here is that when I add a table, I add the table with nothing but the primary key. And the reason I do that is because if the add fails, you've got much fewer variables to try and figure out what caused the error. So after we've added the table with the primary key and we've refreshed our table defs for Access, or we can then go on and either rename columns, we can drop columns, we can add columns, or we can modify them. So there are some data types that can be changed from one to the other. And obviously, if it's a text or varchar, you can change the length of that field. So you can make some changes to columns, particularly for field lengths. Then we can add constraints if they've changed. And there's some differences here between some of these things in Access and SQL Server. In Access, if you want to put a specific date, you've got to put the hashes around it. In SQL Server, it's more or less just treated as a string. With the equivalent of SQL Server for just a date rather than a date time is convert get date to date. So you're just giving it a date. Otherwise, get date's the same as now in Access. We then apply any not null constraints. Oh, yes. And we don't apply the constraints when we actually add the field. That way, if the adding the field falls over, we don't have to figure out which constraint may have caused the problem. So after we've added the field, then we add the constraints and we move on. Now, one thing I've recently come across is this allow zero length thing. Yeah. Where you get text fields that are 0 lengths. And I came across one application where some idiot didn't know how to nulls. So he made every field allow 0 length and made the default for every field an empty string. That was fun to try and sort out. Now, in SQL Server, bits must have a default value and they can't be null. As a general rule, numeric columns, apart from those used in relationships, should have a default value and not allow nulls. So, for example, a quantity or a value, like a currency value, should always have a default of 0 and shouldn't allow nulls. If you don't do that, then you can be typing, okay, give me all the invoices where the total value is 0. And if the total value is null, you're not going to get them. The query won't return that. So it's important to actually get those default values and those not nulls correct. Okay, so as I said, in SQL Server, we have a clustered unique identity index, which is an auto number. And in my mind, every table should have an auto number identity column, even if it's a joining table. If you don't do that, you end up with a joining table that's got a compound primary key, and compound primary keys suck a big one, because some point somebody's going to say, oh, now I want a child table of that joining table, and because you don't have a unique column, what are you going to use as the relationship? You've got to use 2 columns in the relationship, and that just gets so hard. So don't do it. All right. Okay, now we're applying indexes again. Now, with Access, indexes have got a unique property and they have an ignore nulls property. SQL Server's got the unique property, but if you want to ignore nulls, you've got to give that, when you're applying that index, you've got to use something like that, where the column name is not null. Composite indexes, well, when you create an index, you then, in either SQL or Access, you can add multiple fields to that index. So an index actually has a collection of field names. So you can have multiple fields in the one index if you've got a composite index. But please don't use composite primary keys. They annoy me. Anyhow, back to the relationships, and I think we've spoken enough about that. And then at the very end, we apply those scripts from the table of server objects, including views, stored procedures, and triggers, even triggers. Hey, forgot about triggers. Now, finally, a couple of words, refactoring. In a big application like this, I actually have a date this table was modified. Now, when I run the schema update, I can compare the date of the last schema update to the date of when tables were modified. And if a table has been modified since, I need to remove the foreign keys on its parent and its children, obviously. But I don't need to do the entire database. I can restrict the schema update to just those tables that have changed, but taking into account that I need to remove foreign keys that belong to the parents table as well as that table as well. And another little thing. When I'm designing all this stuff, if it's the back end is Access, it's all designed so that one day we can easily move that back end to SQL Server simply by leaving all of these tables as they were. Where's that just gone? All the tables and fields are the same. All we're doing is applying the DAO process rather than the ADO process to get our back end in SQL Server modified. And when I'm doing a migration, I always create the schema in the back end first with all the constraints. So when you're trying to pump the data in, you're going to hit those constraints and have to fix the data before you put it in. If you've got invalid dates that Access will let you do, but SQL Server won't, you'll catch that there. If you've got columns that need to be not null, and for some reason you've got nulls in the source data, this will handle it. And I long ago gave up trying to use the SQL Server Migration Assistant. And even though it's improved a lot over the years, I still like to be able to do things like give nice constraint names and nice index names rather than the garbage that Migration Assistant will give you. Anyhow, that's kind of the process. Any quick overview? Questions?
I have a few, but does anybody else have any questions before I?
This is Leslie, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing this.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I just said thank you very much for doing this.
It's been years of work putting this together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of my questions that I was going to ask. Yeah. Leslie joined us late, so she didn't get a chance to introduce herself earlier. But if you'd like to do that, if you can just tell us who you are and what your connection to Access is, and then we'll.
I'm Leslie Herr, and I work at a community college teaching Access.
Oh, so you're on the nitty gritty end of things.
I don't know. I'm just trying to improve my skills.
Okay.
And be a
Okay.
benefit to my students.
Well, that's wonderful. We hope we can help you out. I do have a question about the time involved, Kent. This is a very comprehensive approach. Do you have any estimate of how many hours you might put into?
Not a clue. But when
Not
you're
a clue.
dealing with, I mean, I've been working this week with a client who has dozens of different backends. Every project they have, they decided to have a different Access backend for it. Now, to manually manage those is just an impossibility. You have to have something like this to do it. The other thing about is having already kind of done that, modifying it for SQL Server, yeah, that was a bit more work again. So it's really been an additive thing. Depending on the necessity, and it's grown to be able to do that full software development lifecycle where it can manage an application going from me on my desktop to being published somewhere where I can't get at their server. I cannot physically modify the database. It has to be done this way. And even in just a simple situation where I'm working on the same local area network, the ability to know that these changes are going to be applied reliably and consistently in a big application, it becomes necessary. I mean, if you've just got a small application where you've got your own test environment and there's a production environment, and you're all sitting on the same local area network, and that includes if you're connecting via remote desktop, then yeah, it's not that difficult to, okay, I'll modify my test environment, and I'll modify production just manually. But there are so many situations where you start getting into big applications, or you're getting into applications where you can't get on site, or you just have lots of different applications. Lots of different backends. Then something like this becomes really quite necessary. But this has been built up over a long period of time. I have no idea how much time it would take, but I'm quite happy to share a lot of this code with you. It's kind of, I'm finding a little bit difficult to extract it from this particular application because it's kind of a bit embedded, but I'm having to do that with a new client I've just taken on, who currently we've got a prototype application that's got a few tables in, and it's got one main form, and it'll have a couple of subforms which will then be cloned. So there'll be, a whole lot of other forms, because one thing I always do is with a new application, you prototype a form, everyone's happy with the way that works, then you clone it. And you get that consistency. Every form works the same way. And if you've got every table that works the same way, then that makes cloning forms really easy. So at this moment, that application is a prototype where you've got a couple of forms and all the tables all in one Access database. It hasn't been split yet. But when we split it, I'll actually upsize it to SQL Server Express. So I'm going to have to export all this there, because there's no way I can actually get at their server to modify their instance of SQL Server. So it's all got to be done from here. And I can't rely on anybody on site to do it reliably.
Right. So you're going to have to rely on your interface to do the whole process. Can I ask another question? Come at it from a slightly different direction. Thinking about it in terms of a range of projects and project sizes and developer emphasis. Okay. If you had to emphasize one part of this process as something that somebody could or should implement originally and then gradually bring the rest of it on board, where would you start, or would you attempt to start with one part of this and then build on? Because as you say, you did this over an extended period of time. So thinking of it in those terms, what would you emphasize as the first place for someone implementing a new system to try to start with?
Well, having a list of your tables and your fields in the front end and being able to apply those to the back end is the most important aspect. Now, when I first started, it wasn't quite as complex as what it is now, but it worked. So if I had a new table that I wanted to create in the back end, I'd just stick it in it here and whatever fields wanted to be created, and it would create them. Getting sort of tied up in more of the foreign key stuff and all that's probably not essential to begin with, but where you start off is the ability to create new tables and new fields without actually having to touch the back end itself.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's probably a key is if you can't log into the server and do it, you're going to have to rely on a system like this. And my preference would be that people are not logging in and messing around in the back end.
Yeah, precisely. And if there are changes to the back end, it's been those changes, the making of those changes has been tested in development and then tested in test before they actually hit production.
Yeah. Okay.
And you're not
Wait,
getting
anybody
errors in production because, oh, I forgot to add this column or I gave it the wrong data type.
And that's going to show up in testing. Do you write your own tests, or do you rely on the customer to do the testing?
Or, well, I do a pretty thorough testing before I give it to the client. Otherwise, your credibility gets whittled away pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Being the developer, you kind of got a good idea of what to test. But on the other hand, users come up with some really interesting things that they do that you just never would have thought of.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories was delivering a new version of a front end. And during the demonstration to my client's contact person, how it worked, She started the application, an error message popped up. She clicked OK before I could even read it. And I thought, oh, I broke something. I better get that. So I said, stop, wait, what was that error? Let's fix that. And her response was, oh, it's always done that. We learned that if you click OK and move on, it's okay. So
I had one the other day where my client just clicked on an error message, just discarded it. I said, did you read that error message? I said, no, it's just, I haven't got time. I said, read that error message. Your back end is corrupt. You have corrupted your back end. There is no point in trying to go any further.
Yeah. I think that's a common kind of circumstance, I guess.
Well, this is where error logging can be quite useful.
Yeah.
I've recently put VB Watchdog into this application, but I do list any schema errors. So if there's any errors that are not to be ignored, they get thrown. So in this particular case, I've got this column here, which has got a not null constraint, but there are 439 nulls in it that need to be sorted out.
Wow. Okay. So does anybody else have a question or a comment?
I have
Adrian, I can't read your lips.
one. I have one.
Sorry.
So if I wanted to watch this again on video, where will it be available?
Okay. I will take that and give you a quick update. We post all of our videos to YouTube. So there's a YouTube channel for the AUG group, and for reasons I won't go into right now, I think we've had a really good experience recently with high quality production, but there's some concern about the amount of time that production is taking, whether the value added is worthwhile. So we're going to try something a little different. Typically it's 3 or 4 days. It could be about that. It might be up to a week before it gets posted, because we are changing the process slightly. Last month, was it? Yeah, when I did my Power Apps demonstration, that was kind of a watershed moment. No, it was the month before last, when we did the Power Apps presentation. And I had serious audio problems, which I invested in a new mic, which seems to be working better. But
Yeah, it is.
It sort of revealed some of these issues about how much time it was actually taking the person doing it. I mean, 2 or 3 days.
It takes a lot longer than an hour to edit a 1 hour video.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So anyway, that's all by way of giving myself a little leeway that it might be a week, but it will be on our YouTube channel. And
so how do I find the YouTube channel?
okay, I'm going to,
You can put that in the chat.
I'll put that in the chat. Hang on one second.
It's also on the user group website. There's links to them there.
User group. Put that in the chat too.
Okay.
Well, how'd you get here if you didn't go through the...
I got an email.
Oh, okay. Well, the email would have the user group.
Okay.
Well,
So,
let me go.
yes. Yeah, it should be in the email. So I just put the YouTube channel in the, oh, I should send that to everyone as well. I should do that. So everyone should get it. That's the YouTube channel. And what was the other question? Oh, the website. And I will. You can do it. You can do it. There we go. Okay, so that is our page. Access Specific is the newest chapter in the group. But I think so far it's the best. So I'm maybe a little bit biased, but I'm pretty happy. Are there any other questions about the presentation?
I guess I have a question for Kent. Do you ever use Total Access Analyzer? Because I noticed you talking a lot about documenting where everything's used, you know, your form, everything. I've used that tool for many, many years and I love it. It's worth its weight in gold.
I actually own it, but I've sort of done my own because I had specific needs and wants, and because I'm a programmer, I can actually get it to do what I need and want exactly. That topic of the dependencies, that's a whole entire session on its own. The stuff you've got to go through in that, and particularly when you're trying to extract an object name out of an SQL string, that's not easy. You've got to know, okay, what are the possible characters that can be before or after, and just all the possible permutations. So doing all of that dependency stuff is a lot of work, but I had specific needs, and I wanted to be able to have it in the format I want. And even if you look at, for example, with queries, I built my own find and replace, so I can load from the query def. I can do a find and replace here and load it back to the query def. Now, for many years, that was just absolutely brilliant. Saved so much time. But now that Access has actually got a find and replace in the SQL view, this is now redundant. But the sort of things that you just wrote myself because they just save so much time. And of course, here's the dichotomy. As a developer, you do spend a lot of time writing tools that save a lot of time and actually save your client a lot of money. So with these tools, you're kind of doing yourself out of money, but you end up with so many clients that you just don't have any time to do any more anyway. So the tools just make you appear a lot more professional and add a lot of value to what you do. Now, for example, here's a good example. Server objects, right? These are stored procedures, views, and triggers. Now, Access Analyzer won't tell you where they're used, what their dependencies are, and what other objects are dependent on them. So, yeah, this goes a fair bit further and gives in areas that I actually need. And while the Luke's one is really quite good, actually Crystal's is pretty good too. I just had requirements that neither of those would fill. And I probably had too much time on my hands that day.
Well, you're bridging for both environments, so I don't think the Luke's tool or Crystal's tool is intended to do.
No, they're not.
Outside of the Access. So
because I store all the SQL scripts in my front end, I can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Even things like I can see all the image attachments in the application and where they're used and all that sort of stuff. Little things that okay, no, that'd save me a lot of time. So I put in a bit of time on it, and over the years it saves me much more.
You get a pretty good return on your investment.
In time terms, yes.
Yeah.
Not in money terms, but
Not
in time terms.
not in billable hours, but in certainly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, the other side of that, though, I would say is that the amount of time you are able to bill is probably more enjoyable. You're doing work that is productive and satisfying as opposed to grunt work.
Yeah, well, see, here's the thing, being professional, part of it's being paid for what you do, but part of it is being professional, giving value. It's one thing to just hack away and do repetitive. I don't like doing repetitive stuff, really don't. And that's what automation's all about. So, automation is about, for example, I have a data class for customers. And if we go and have a look at that data class, it looks something like this, right? Where everybody's got a find function. So it's got all the variables, the find functions, and all the properties for each field that are in that table and what have you, right? Now, how long would it take to sit down and write that by hand? And given that I've got that same thing for all of these other entities, I have a function that writes that class. It just iterates through the table fields, looks at their data type and creates the appropriate properties and does things like puts the ifs and the buts and all that sort of stuff in it. And that's all totally automated. For me to sit down and write a data class like that takes me 5 minutes. Whereas if you're trying to do that by hand, imagine how long that would take.
Yeah.
Even things like, and let's have a look at one little example here. Right, when I'm creating a server object or whatever, and I want a list of all the fields that are in that table, there they are. And I can just copy that into SQL Server, into Management Studio. And if I wanted to modify that so that then I can just modify the code so it gives it to me. But yeah, that sort of stuff. I mean, just a button like that, how much time does that save instead of having to type out every column in SQL Server?
Right. I appreciate it. We've run well past our hour, so I think we probably should.
Well, you're not paying me by the hour, George.
Sorry?
You're not paying me by the hour.
Well, no, we're not paying you at all, unless I missed the fine print in the emails, which is possible. And I do appreciate that Kent stepped up and offered to do this or agreed to do this, because I think it's pretty important for us all to kind of recognize that there's this scale. Again, as I started by saying, there's this scale from what Armin calls the cowboy coder to this very, very sophisticated approach. And I think those of us who want to be in the business for the long term probably do need to think more seriously about this approach as opposed to getting it done. And I have some other analogies, but I won't indulge those now because we are over time. So are there any other questions for Kent that we can address or comments? Okay. Well, I'll end up with a solicitation for ideas for future presentations. I have a couple that I'm trying to recruit people to talk about. One being SQL Server security. I think that's an important thing.
Yes, please.
That we do need. I have some ideas, but I'm by no means the expert on that, and so I'm trying to recruit some other folks who are better with SQL Server security to do a presentation. I hope to get that lined up soon. But on that note, I guess we can call it a night. Thanks again, Kent. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, it's a pleasure to be part of this group, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. I will get this processed and up on YouTube as quickly as possible.
And I'll provide the Word document that I used.
Oh, okay, great. And I'll figure out how to make that available.
Well,
do you have a website where we can do that? I can put it on my public OneDrive if that works.
Yeah, I can put it up on my website too. I've got some stuff on there about software development lifecycle already and why it's important and how it all works. But after this, I'll elaborate a little more.
Okay, great. And if you can get that to me, I'll put that link in the YouTube description when it's ready.